Since the addition of skill-based matchmaking as well as balance changes that sometimes feel like they come straight out of a slot machine, DBD is truly reaching a point where nearly everyone is running the same exact builds. It makes every match feel very similar to the last, and it's the primary reason why I think people, especially veteran players, are finding DBD to be pretty boring or stale at the moment. And this is not a problem that can really be fixed through conventional balance. For example, if they nerf these two gen defense perks, then the next two best gen defense perks will immediately take their spot. Or if we nerf this really overused exhaustion perk, then everyone will just move to the next best exhaustion perk. Or my god, maybe the devs will try to make a new strong perk and completely destroy the game in the process. Basically, the balance team can shift all of these parts around as much as they want, but as they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. That's why I believe the only thing that could actually fix DBD's meta problem is Call of Duty's Pick 10 create a class system, and I'm not joking. For those who don't know, Pick 10 was added to Call of Duty back in Black Ops 2, and it allowed players to have a more creative freedom over their builds, because instead of just having the basic options of 2 guns, 2 attachments, 3 perks, and equipment, Pick 10 gave players options to remove certain parts of their build, like perks and equipment, to instead put every possible attachment on their gun, or vice versa. So they were trading value from one end of their build to put it somewhere else. Now, if you try to apply this same exact system to DBD without changing anything, it would not fix any problems, and in fact, it would probably make the issues I brought up before even worse, because DBD is not Call of Duty. The Pick 10 system would need to be modified, otherwise players would just pick the absolute best build their favorite content creators would show them, and behavior's already struggling balance team would probably explode. So DBD would need its own variation of the system. However, as I'll explain in this video, DBD having a Pick 10 or currency-based system would have a crazy amount of benefits to it, not only for players, but the balance team and the design team as well. Now, before I start showing examples, I want to be clear that these numbers are only a concept. If you think the values are off on anything like a certain perk or add-on, just change them around in your head. It's really the idea that I want to promote and not so much the numbers exactly as they are. And I know that this is a very taboo subject in the DBD community. People literally destroy their keyboards over minor perk changes around here, but I am imploring you to entertain the idea and give it a chance.
You implore me? You implore me? You always were one for fancy words.
So for our first example, let's start with killer. Let's look at Freddy and Nurse. In my personal opinion, Freddy is the worst killer in the game and Nurse is the best. Right now, this is viewed as a problem. People will say Nurse needs nerfed and Freddy needs a buff, right? Freddy is too weak and Nurse is too strong. It's sort of the community's never-ending endeavor to push everything to the middle balance-wise. But now, with this currency system, things are allowed to be at different levels of strength without there being a problem, because this allows for killers to have different currency pools. So Freddy, being the weakest killer in the game, can have 100 points to spend on his build, whereas Nurse, being the strongest, now has way less points available because her power is so oppressive. Now, before I continue with this, I need to quickly address some problem points. First off, this is not a nerf killer video. I'm going to address survivors as well. But mainly, I just want to address the biggest counter argument to a currency system like this, which is, do I really trust or believe that Behavior's balance team is capable of managing a system like this? And it really is a good counter argument, because a lot of people wouldn't trust the balance team at Behavior to tie their own shoes. But that's kind of the point. A currency system is complex for sure, but as opposed to what exactly? Balancing every perk, every power, every item, and every add-on in the game? That's way more difficult and time consuming than simply adding a currency system. For instance, right now, if the devs want to change a perk, first they have to decide what they want to do differently with the perk. Then a programmer actually has to change the perk, likely creating new bugs in the spaghetti coding. Then that change has to be supposedly play tested, maybe just by us on the PTB. Then the perk changes have to be finalized for the live release. It's a lot of work, and in the end, for what? There's no good outcome. The perk is either too weak, so nobody uses it, it's too strong, so it needs nerfed again, or it replaces another perk in the meta because it does the same thing another perk already did, just a little bit better. So really nothing is accomplished and the devs waste a bunch of time. But with a currency system, they don't even have to update the game. They could just change the currency value of the perk on the back end like they do with a kill switch. So yes, that's a really long-winded way of saying that I would trust behavior to manage a currency system more than I would trust them to manually fix every other balance problem in the game. Also, to anyone who makes the claim that a currency system is too confusing for the DBD player base, I call BS. The devs can literally announce a 0.1% change to an add-on, and overnight nobody will ever use it again. Like, the DBD community can pretend they don't pay attention to these things, but I definitely can see that they do. So the indication that they wouldn't be able to handle a very simple currency system, I'm not buying that. And the last point I want to make is that if anyone wants to use the DBD competitive scene as a counter argument to this currency system, you can't, because they have a million unique rules to the point where it's basically a different game entirely. Alright, so finally getting back to Freddy and Nurse. Freddy can use his 100 points to create a really strong build. He can use great perks and his best add-ons. Maybe he even has enough left over to afford a map offering. Now, you might say, well, he's just running the normal meta build. How did this currency system fix anything? Well, because someone might actually pick Freddy now. That's the difference. Moving on to Nurse, the best killer in the game in my opinion. She has 50 points to spend on her build. Now, she can run 2 strong perks with some decent add-ons, or she can adapt and find a more creative way to spend her points. And you might say, isn't this just basically a way to nerf strong killers? And no, that's not the point, and on the contrary, it's a way to keep strong killers strong. Look at the broader picture. Both killer and survivor, especially survive with friends, would be restricted in a way that actually allows for more diversity. With a currency system, Nurse can be extremely strong with strong add-ons, and nothing needs nerfed. She can exist in the game without causing issues. She no longer bottlenecks the devs from creating stronger, interesting perks like she has in the past. As it stands now with the current system, it's probably only a matter of time before Nurse gets another inevitable nerf or rework. Also, on a side note, I thought it would be a cool idea to take any unused points in a build and convert that into bonus blood points. This incentivizes players not to go out of their way to spend every last point, or maybe even go into matches with no build for 100% extra blood points. Now, moving on to Survivor. First, let's start with a solo queue player. In my example here, a solo queue player is as weak as Freddy. Maybe you see it differently, but the solo queue survivor would have 100 points to spend on their build. Now, they could do the very typical meta build and leave no points for an item or a map offering, or they could run less oppressive perks, then bring a medkit and a map offering. So they would still have some restrictions like Freddy, but way more freedom than what you would find in a 4-man Swift. Also, if I'm triggering anyone with the map offerings, I do apologize. I agree with the idea that they should be map bans instead of map picks. But back to the point about 4-man survive with friends. And again, these are just conceptual numbers, but assuming 100 points is base kit, I would deduct 10 points per extra survivor. So a 2-man Swift would have 90 points each, a 3-man Swift would have 80 points each, and a 4-man Swift would have 70 points each to use for their builds. So a survivor in a 4-man Swift would now have to either say, screw it, I'm just going to take 3 strong perks and that's going to be my entire build, or they'll have to get more creative and trade out strong perks for less powerful versions of themselves. Instead of Sprint Burst, take Dramaturgy. Instead of Windows of Opportunity, take Any Means Necessary. Hope or Adrenaline replaced with No One Left Behind, and then there's a little wiggle room left for a medkit and some anti-tunnel. Another thing that Call of Duty's Pick 10 system had was Wildcards. These cards would take up one of your 10 slots, reducing it to 9, but would unlock a unique option in your build, like for example running an additional perk. Now, I don't know if this is a great idea for DBD. This could muddy the water for the balance side of things. It wouldn't be so difficult to implement, as cheaters often run way more than 4 perks, so that's not so much the issue as the balance side of it itself. So it's not out of the question, but wildcards are not something that should launch initially with the system if it was ever added to DBD. That said, I do think this opens up an interesting idea on using perks or add-ons that are detrimental to the player, but with the added benefit of adding currency to their build. For example, No Mither. A survivor could use it to weaken themselves and then try to use those extra bonus points to make a more unique build that other players can't. Same thing for killer running meme add-ons like Speed Limiter, and again, this opens up more doors for the developers to think outside the box when designing or even redesigning perks. Unlike with No Mither and Speed Limiter that can still be used effectively in certain ways, the devs can now make straight up negative perks that still have a currency trade-off, sort of like a modifier. For example, a perk where you as a survivor are oblivious the entire match. That's it. That's the entire perk, but it gives you a lot more points to spend on the rest of your build to make up for it. In general, the design team using a currency system would be way more free to create really strong or really weak killers, perks, add-ons, and items, while unironically maintaining a way more balanced game than DBD is currently. No matter how good a player is at Dead by Daylight, they are ultimately propped up by their builds and what they bring into a match. I have played against amazing nurse players who ran no perks or add-ons and got 4-man outed, and I've played against gutter tier nurses that run full meta and get a 4K. Builds make an enormous difference in outcomes, and unfortunately, it's really easy to outperk people in DBD. Now, you could still make the argument that players will still find the most optimal builds for every killer and in Survive with Friends, but I think you would genuinely be surprised how difficult that would actually be with a currency system like this. There would just be so much variability that even if a specific nurse player decided they found their perfect build, it most likely wouldn't be the build another nurse main would prefer to use. And even if that did happen, where there became a standardized meta build for nurse that all the tryhard nurse mains used, not only would it still be more balanced than the game currently is right now, but the balance team could slightly alter the value of something in the build and render the entire build useless with the flick of a switch, causing everyone who used the build to start testing out new tryhard build combinations to then repeat the cycle again. As you look at the current state of DBD as it is now, an ocean of worthless perks that don't get used, killer powers that are insanely oppressive, other killers that never get used, survivors who stack second chances, gen rush builds, and exhausting exhaustion perks, how do you realistically fix any of this? You could try to add a ranked mode or remove skill-based matchmaking, but I honestly don't see that that would solve any of these complex problems. A currency system really does feel like the Deus Ex Machina for making DBD's core mode fun and variable again. And if you believe DBD is fun right now, that's totally fine, you're not wrong, but this is a genuine issue that a lot of players are having. Like, I didn't write these reviews. Look at the dates. Look at the thumbs ups. The only real major criticism I can think of in this video is that I clickbaited the title of it by saying COD's Pick 10 system and then heavily altered everything about it to fix DBD's issues. But even that felt somewhat necessary to help explain this idea properly. One thing I've learned about making videos like this is that the DBD community is unfortunately very contrarian. It's not that they'll necessarily disagree with an idea like this, that would be fine. I don't mind discussing these things, and sometimes I am legitimately wrong, or I have a bad take. The contrarian problem I'm referring to is this mindset of looking at a complex idea, like adding a currency system, and then finding one tiny little flaw that I overlooked or misspoke on, and then using that to justify tearing the entire idea apart. It's definitely one of the more frustrating aspects of creating videos like this. That said, if you think a currency system is a good idea, or at least found it interesting, consider leaving the video a like, as it massively helps out the channel. Or if there's a glaring flaw, leave a juicy dislike and let me know about it down in the comments. And as always, thanks for watching and have a good one.
You always were one for fancy words.